The fountain hit you first, not the water. The sound, that particular echo of water hitting tile in a space so large it had its own weather. Then the noise came in layers. Shoes on the terrazzo, an arcade cabinet 2 floors up bleeding a Pac-Man death rattle through the atrium, music you could not identify, coming from somewhere above you, not quite loud enough to name the song, and underneath all of it, the hum of a building that was alive. You were 12, maybe 13. It was a Saturday morning, and your mother had dropped you off at the entrance closest to the food court because she had errands, and you had nowhere else to be, and both of those things were fine with everyone involved. You had $7 in your pocket and the whole afternoon ahead of you, and you did not need a phone because there was nobody to call. Everyone you wanted to see was already inside. That mall is dead now. And it did not die because people stopped showing up. A man in Toronto borrowed $6 billion to buy the department stores at each end of your building. When he could not make the payments, those stores filed what was, at the time, the largest retail bankruptcy in American history. The anchors went dark. The mall never recovered. But that was not even the worst part. After the anchors fell, Wall Street found a way to turn the building itself into a bond. And a new breed of money men found an entirely legal way to collect fees for every single month that building sat empty. 3 forces killed that mall. I am going to name all 3, but first, you need to remember what that building sounded like when it was still full. You walked in and the temperature changed, summer or winter. It did not matter. The mall was always the same 72 degrees, the same recycled air, carrying the same mix of Cinnabon and floor wax and the perfume counter by the nearest department store entrance. You learned to breathe through your mouth past that counter because the women working there would aim for your wrist if you slowed down. The arcade was in the back, always in the back. You had to walk past everything to get there. That was the point. The carpet in the arcade was dark, patterned in shapes that hid the stains from 1,000 spilled drinks. The air tasted different in there, warmer, denser, like the machines were breathing. You could hear the quarters dropping from 20 feet away, that specific metallic click of a coin slot accepting payment. Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat. The driving games with the plastic steering wheels that never quite turned the way they should. You stood behind someone playing and you put your quarter on the cabinet's edge. That meant you had next. Everyone knew the rule. Nobody taught it. You just knew. The food court was the center of everything, not the geographic center, the social center. Sbarro with the slices sitting under heat lamps, the cheese already starting to set. Orange Julius, where the machine behind the counter whirred so loud the kid working the register had to shout your total. Hot Sam pretzels, where the salt was visible from 10 feet away and the mustard came in packets you had to tear with your teeth. The chairs were bolted to the floor in clusters of 4. If your group had 5, someone dragged a chair from the next cluster and it scraped across the tile and everyone in the food court heard it and nobody cared. What was the first thing you bought when you walked into that mall? Not what your parents bought. What you bought. With your own money. Tell me in the comments, you hit Sam Goody to look at CDs you could not afford. You hit Walden Books because the science fiction section was in the back and nobody bothered you. Spencer's had a blacklight room in the rear of the store and a sign that said you had to be 18 to enter and you were not 18. And you entered anyway, and it was mostly just lava lamps and posters, but it felt like you had gotten away with something. KB Toys had a bin near the front door, a discount bin, and you went through it every single time, even though you knew what was in it. You went through it because going through it was the thing you did. If you spent a Saturday at that mall, you already know everything I just described. Subscribe if you want to see what happened to every store and every place that built the world you grew up in. This channel remembers all of it. That mall felt permanent. It felt like the building itself was a given, like the parking lot and the food court and the fountain in the center would be there as long as the town was there. It wasn't. 3 things were already in motion that would destroy it, and 2 of them started before you ever set foot inside. The first one began in Vienna, the second one began in Washington, the third one began in Toronto. All 3 of them ended in your mall. Christmas was different. The decorations went up the day after Thanksgiving, and the entire building transformed. The center court had a tree that touched the second floor railing. Garland wrapped every balcony. The music switched from anonymous soft rock to Bing Crosby and Nat King Cole, and you could hear it clearly because the mall turned it up in December. They wanted you to feel it. Santa's village appeared near the fountain. The line wrapped past the shoe store. The photographer had a Polaroid set up, and the backdrop was a painted fireplace that looked real if you were 5 and looked ridiculous if you were 12, but you went anyway because your mother was watching and she still believed you believed. Maybe you still did. The energy was different at Christmas. Every person in that building was carrying bags. The parking lot was full by 10 in the morning. The department store at the East End had gift wrap on the 3rd floor, and your father disappeared into it while your mother took you to the other end of the building, and nobody said why, but everyone knew why. You'd find each other at the food court an hour later. Your father always had a bag he wouldn't let you see. Your mother was smiling. The mall made that possible. It gave your family a place to do the thing families do in December, together and apart at the same time, in a building warm enough to take off your coat. If you remember Christmas at the mall, you know exactly what I'm describing, and what I'm about to show you is who killed it, not what. Who. 3 forces, three decades, and every one of them was entirely legal. It started with a man from Vienna who hated everything his invention became. Victor Gruen was an architect, and he was Jewish. He fled Austria in 1938, arrived in New York with $8 and no English, and spent the next 2 decades designing retail spaces across America. In 1956, he built the first fully enclosed, climate-controlled shopping mall in the country, Southdale Center in Edina, Minnesota. It opened on October 8th. It had 72 stores, cost $20 million, and included 2 anchor department stores at opposite ends with a common area in the middle. But Gruen did not design a shopping mall, he designed a community. His plans included housing, medical offices, schools, libraries, and parks. He had modeled the whole thing on the arcades of Vienna, where people gathered because the space invited them to gather. The mall was supposed to be the town square that American suburbs did not have. Developers looked at the plans. They built the retail box. They paved the land around it for parking. They cut the housing, the schools, the medical offices, the libraries, every piece that did not generate lease revenue. They kept the stores and threw away the community. Gruen watched it happen across the country. By the mid-1970s, he had disowned his own creation. He told the Los Angeles Times in 1979 that he refused to pay homage to the emperor of our time and that people had become sheep. But you did not know any of that. You were 12 years old, standing in front of a Galaga machine, feeding quarters into an arcade cabinet that did not care about architecture or zoning law or the difference between a town square and a tax shelter. That tax shelter is the second force. In 1981, Congress passed the Economic Recovery Tax Act. It created accelerated depreciation for commercial real estate. Building a shopping center became one of the best write-offs in America, so developers built everywhere. Every suburb got a mall. Some suburbs got two. The construction wasn't driven by demand. It was driven by the tax code. By 1987, America had more than 30,000 shopping centers, generating more than half of all retail sales in the country. The United States had 23.5 square feet of retail space for every man, woman, and child in the nation, 5 times more than Britain, 10 times more than Germany. We didn't just build malls. We were overbuilt on a scale no other country on earth had ever attempted. Then, in 1986, Congress passed the Tax Reform Act and reversed the depreciation incentives. The math changed, but the buildings were already standing, too many malls for too few shoppers. The structure was overbuilt before anything else went wrong, and inside every one of them, the food court was still full on Saturday afternoon, the fountain was still running. Nobody sitting in those bolted-down chairs knew the math had already turned against the building they were sitting in. Then a man from Toronto made the math worse. Robert Campeau was a Canadian real estate developer. He had built shopping centers and office towers across Ontario. He had no background in retail. He had never managed a store or run a register in his life. What he had was access to junk bond financing, and in 1986, that opened more doors than 20 years running a department store. He bought Allied stores for $3.5 billion. He borrowed almost all of it. Allied owned Brooks Brothers, Ann Taylor, Jordan Marsh, and the Bon Marche. These were names your mother recognized when she saw them printed on the mall directory. Campeau did not buy Allied because he wanted to run those stores. He bought them because the real estate underneath them was worth more than the company's stock price. That was the math. That was always the math. Within months, he had sold 15 of 22 divisions. Brooks Brothers went to Marks & Spencer for $770 million. Other divisions were carved off and flipped. Thousands of jobs were eliminated across the country. Not because the stores were failing, because the debt demanded it. 2 years later, he went bigger, Federated Department Stores. The big one. The company that owned Bloomingdale's, Abraham and Straus, Berdini's, Riches and Lazarus. The anchors. The department stores whose names were printed on the walls at each end of your mall. The reason the smaller stores in between could charge the rent they charged. The reason the whole building worked. A bidding war with R.H. Macy drove the price from $4.2 billion to $6.6 billion. $73.50 per share. Campeau won. Macy's chief executive, Edward Finkelstein, had wanted Federated badly enough to push the bidding well past what any analyst considered rational. He lost, but the price Campeau paid to beat him would destroy both companies. Campeau had just loaded the anchor stores of 1,000 American malls with more than $8 billion in junk bond debt. The interest payments alone consumed the operating cash flow of stores that had been profitable for decades. Maintenance budgets were cut. Remodels were canceled. Hiring freezes went into effect at stores that had never had a hiring freeze. And the stores still opened every morning. The lights still came on. The perfume counter still had women waiting to spray your wrist. Inside the mall, nothing looked different. The debt was invisible. It lived in filing cabinets in Toronto and on trading desks in New York. It had nothing to do with the kid buying a pretzel in the food court until it did. By the fall of 1988, Campo could not move $1.15 billion in high-yield bonds. The market would not take them. The cash started running out. The empire he had assembled in 2 years bled for over a year before the end came. The stores kept their doors open through that Christmas. Bloomingdale's ran its holiday windows. The sales floors were staffed. Most employees had no idea what was coming. The shoppers walking through the mall in December of 1989 were buying gifts from a company that was already dead. The paperwork just had not been filed yet. On Monday, January 15, 1990, Federated Department Stores and Allied Stores Corporation filed voluntary petitions for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection in the Southern District of Ohio. It was the largest retail bankruptcy in American history at that time. Hundreds of stores were eventually shuttered across the country, not because customers stopped walking through the doors, but because a real estate developer from Toronto had used their revenue to service a debt that could not be serviced. How many of those anchor stores were in your mall? Count them. Tell me what went dark first. And it did not stop there. R.H. Macy, the company that had lost the bidding war to Campo, had taken on its own mountain of debt in the fight. A management buyout in 1986, $3.5 billion. Then they bought Bullocks and I. Magnin from Campo's fire sale for another $1.1 billion. On January 27, 1992, Macy's filed Chapter 11, $5.3 billion in liabilities, 2 anchor chains, both bankrupt inside of 24 months. The department stores that held the American mall together had been hollowed out by borrowed money before most shoppers even knew anything was wrong. You could see it if you knew where to look. The anchor at the south end of your mall started closing its upper floors. The escalator to the 3rd level stopped running, and they put a rope across it. The cosmetics counters got thinner. The shoe department shrank. One day, the restaurant on the upper floor just did not open, and nobody announced it. The menu was still posted by the elevator. The lights were off behind the glass. You rode that escalator 100 times as a kid, watching the floors drop away beneath you. Now the escalator was still, and the floor it used to carry you to was dark. That was 1991. You were married by then. Maybe had a kid on the way. You still went to that mall on weekends because it was the closest place to buy shoes for work and grab lunch without thinking too hard about it. And the food court still had its orange Julius. The fountain was still running. But something was off, and you could not quite name it. While the anchors were shutting down, people on Wall Street were putting together something new. And it would change who owned your mall and what they thought it was for. 1992, the Resolution Trust Corporation, the federal agency cleaning up the savings and loan crisis, needed to unload billions of dollars in distressed commercial real estate loans. They bundled those loans into securities and sold them to investors. The first rated deal was dated January of that year. That's when modern commercial mortgage-backed securities really took shape. CMBS. By 2007, the market had grown from a handful of government fire sale deals into $229 billion issued in a single year. That was the peak. Your mall did not have a local owner anymore. It had a bondholder, maybe a pension fund 2,000 miles away, maybe an insurance company that owned pieces of 200 malls and could not have told you which city yours was in. somebody who had never set foot in the place, somebody reading a spreadsheet. The mall had been turned into a financial instrument, treated on Wall Street like future rent checks that could be bundled up and sold off in pieces. On that spreadsheet, every dollar spent maintaining the building was a dollar subtracted from the bondholder's return. The roof leaked, the repair was deferred, the fountain broke, it stayed broken. The skylights yellowed, nobody cleaned them. The parking lot cracked, nobody repaved it. Each decision was rational on the spreadsheet. Each decision made the building worse in person. The hallways that used to echo with 1,000 Saturday footsteps started echoing with yours alone. When a mall loan goes bad, it transfers to a special servicer. These are firms that manage distressed commercial debt. Their fee structure is simple: 25 basis points a year on the outstanding loan balance, just for holding it. Then workout fees, liquidation fees, 50 to 100 basis points on every dollar that moves through the process. The longer the distress lasts, the more they earn. One documented case, a single commercial loan spent 39 months in special servicing. The servicer and its partners collected $56 million in interest and fees on that one property. The borrower took them to court. They alleged in the filing that the servicer had deliberately drawn out the process to extend fee collection. Your mall didn't just die. Somebody collected a check for every month of the funeral. If this is the first time anyone has seen who was on the other end of that check, subscribe. There are more of these stories, and they all end the same way. Share this with someone who watched their mall go dark and got told it was their fault for shopping online. It wasn't. The math was broken before the first website loaded. There was one Christmas you didn't know was the last one. They hadn't put up near as much as usual that year. The tree didn't quite reach the second floor railing. Some of the garland had gaps where bulbs had burned out and nobody replaced them. But the music was playing and the stores were open and your mother was carrying bags, and for a couple of hours it still felt the way it always had. The Santa was in a different spot than last year. The photo setup looked cheaper. The line was shorter, which should have felt like a break, but it didn't. A short line meant something was wrong. You could see it in the faces of the parents waiting. They knew, even if nobody said it in front of the kids. You walked past one of the anchor stores. There was brown paper on the windows. A handwritten sign said, "Coming soon," but it didn't say what. It never said what. You didn't stop. You kept walking toward the food court because the food court was still there. If that was still going, the rest of it didn't matter as much. The Orange Julius was still open. The same machine whirring behind the counter, the same kid shouting your total. You bought one, maybe one of the last ones they ever sold there. You didn't know. You were just thirsty. The mall was warm, the music was on. That was enough for one afternoon in December. Tell me the last time you walked through your mall. What year? What was still open? What was already dark? A man from Vienna designed a place where a community could gather. Developers stripped it to retail and surrounded it with asphalt. A tax law built too many of them. A man from Toronto bankrupted the stores that held them together. Wall Street turned the buildings into bonds, and a class of financial operators collected fees entirely legally for every month the lights stayed off. The fountain is quiet now. The arcade is gone. The food court is dark. But you remember the sound. That echo of water on tile in a building large enough to have its own weather. You were 12. It was Saturday. And for a while, that was enough. Next time, a lunch counter that used to be in every downtown in America. Your grandmother sat on a red vinyl stool and ordered a grilled cheese for 35 cents. The day they closed those counters, something else disappeared with them.